things you want to avoid. So I'm calling ultra-processed food one item, but obviously it is multiple foods, and it is hard to define. Some definitions include any food that contains more than 10 ingredients that you don't recognize, which I quite as a nice one. Others are foods that are only prepared from extracts of other foods. So they're not a combination of real foods together, but they are the extract of some grain, the extract of some bean, the extract of some protein, and they're sort of put together, molded together in a factory and presented to us. Now, the average American has 60% of their energy from these kinds of foods. So they're, and 50% in Canada and the US and UK. So they're pretty ubiquitous. And we believe they're bad for the gut microbes for, firstly, the reason they often have very little fiber. So most of it doesn't reach the actual lower intestine of any value anyway. Most of it is, a lot of it is absorbed early on. And the bits that do reach the lower intestine might include some of these chemicals. The first thing one to think about is the emulsifiers. These are the food glues that do occur in nature, but also are chemically made that stick foods together. So particularly in the food processing arena, you've got lots of these things made in factories that wouldn't naturally go together. So you've got to stick something there to make it get some consistency and stop it just fragmenting. And so we know that at least 3 out of the 5 commonest emulsifiers used have a negative effect on our gut microbes and cause a loss of general diversity and alter the chemical signals that they are producing. So they send off negative inflammatory signals to the body and the brain when they hit. There are some ones that may be fine. We also know that there's actually quite a lot of individual variation. So some people might be super sensitive to these in their gut microbes, and others might be able to have many more of them. So again, I think we're going to see a personalization about which of these very commonly used products in our food system are causing some people real problems. A bit like we used to worry about E-number, additives and all these other things that we really need to pay much more attention to how these chemicals affect our gut microbes. And just the record, they're never studied in any country before they're widely available to hundreds of millions of people. And it's crazy that, they're only tested, for cancer in rats, never for its effect on our precious microbes. So that's one group. The other one that I'm particularly worried about is the artificial sweeteners. And many people have artificially sweetened beverages, the Diet Pepsis, Diet Cokes that are told are perfectly healthy for us. And they are good to reduce tooth problems, tooth decay, undoubtedly. That's a big bonus. But metabolically, the trials are really unconvincing that you switch from a full sugar drink to the diet equivalent. It has any real difference on your metabolism or your weight. And that's rather odd given they're so calorie rich. So we think there are other products in there. And so there's been several studies on aspartame and sucralose, which are the 2 most commonly used sweeteners, showing that first in mouse studies, they can cause damage to mouse guts, and that those transfers can be transferred from one animal to another. And they've also done a limited number of human studies also showing that in some people, not all, they can disrupt the human microbiota as well. Again, the idea that the microbes encounter some chemical that, remember, most of these come from the petrol industry, paraffins, etc., they wouldn't normally be eating. So they're not really adaptive for that. They hit the aspartame molecule and sort of sparks fly and weird chemicals come off. We think that's what's happening. It can't really process it, and it seems to upset them. We don't know about the new ones like stevia really, but I think in general we should be wary about it and realize that there might be lots of differences between humans and how we react to them. And the final group are, I think, preservatives that are there to give food its really long shelf life. And generally they tend to be antimicrobial. And so that's a reason to really worry and fear about them. We don't have that much knowledge about them. So it's that lack of good nutrients, the lack of fiber, as we've mentioned, the polyphenols in the plants, they're virtually non-existent in these foods. So there's nothing really good in there. And you've got these increasing sets of weird chemicals that in many of us do have side effects. So it's taken me a while to answer that, but that's my worry. And I think but it's important because I think it's no one ever focuses on. They're all focused on, is it lower in calories? Is it lower in fat or sugar or salt? And all the evidence now is showing that that's not the main reason. It's these factors that affect our gut microbes. But the other thing is, as been shown in this NIH trial, is they also make you hungrier. And some of that might be the microbes sending off hunger signals, or it might be a direct effect on the brain. And that's one reason that, I think it's the number one enemy. Although, and we know we're all susceptible because they're made to be super tasty. So and we can't do without them completely. So I think, we have to be realistic and work out how we can reformulate them or have such a good basic diet that we can occasionally go crazy and have one of these super tasty but unhealthy meals without it having long-term consequences.
So you've went really in depth on the processed foods, but what about additives within whole foods, things like antibiotics in meats they put in the feed or pesticides on conventional produce? How do those impact the microbiome?
We know that in theory they impact them, and there are lots of mouse and rodent studies showing the effects of both antibiotics and pesticides on rodents. There's really limited data on humans because it's very hard to study humans long term for those effects. And if we take antibiotics, we know that there's again a hugely varied response of humans to a standard dose of antibiotics. Some people, microbiome recovers after a therapeutic dose very quickly, but maybe 1 in 3 people will still not have recovered 6 months later. So it's those people we worry about, that if they're getting these tiny doses from cheap meats with antibiotics in them, they could have a long-term effect. And if you extrapolate those to the animal models, that causes obesity and increased allergy. So I think an important message is that antibiotics, whether you take them by mouth, injection, or in a slow amount in your food, have the potential to do you harm. Now, I don't think we know how much harm, and it could be extremely variable between us, so hard to say what the average is. But I do think we should be much more wary about antibiotics in our food system, not just because of antibiotic resistance, but because if people are, it's a bit subjected to these things nearly every day of their lives, it's quite likely to have an effect that is very hard to see in a human experiment. So certainly it's another reason to move away from cheap processed meats in food and look for equivalents, either going to high quality meats that are free of these products or using meat substitutes. Now, pesticides is another one, and most of the data is on Roundup, which is the most commonly used pesticide in the world, which is actually a herbicide. So we use the terms interchangeably, but really the idea is it kills off weeds. And it's healthy for humans, but interestingly, it does alter our gut microbes and means that they then produce abnormal chemicals in the same process, and so can affect our immune systems and our health. And the studies are suggesting that it is sometimes associated with some strange blood cancers, and several juries have awarded big amounts of money in California for it. But I think my idea is it's likely a very small effect, and people who should be worried are more like young babies and pregnant women. I don't think it has major effects on most of us, but certainly we should be looking for alternatives if they're sustainable and don't completely mess up our food system. So the data is accumulating that they can definitely affect our gut microbes, and I think this individuality is going to creep. And there will be some people that will react to it. Maybe those people are the unlucky ones that might get these rare lymphomas. So another reason that we should be switching, as many countries are, to getting organic foods and moving away from some of the foods that just naturally, like oats, contain huge amounts of pesticides just because the way that they're cultivated.
If you enjoyed that clip, press here for the full episode. I'll see you over there.
So it does mean a little bit of education about our bodies and, this new organ that's suddenly come into our lives, which we didn't know 10 years ago really was there, that all of us have.